All right, here we go. We are live, James. Welcome to my YouTube channel. You and I go way back, maybe like a year or two now. Just good friends in the no-code world. You originally started off leading a team of product for a company in the UK, and then you kind of left to do your own thing. But tell me a little bit more about, your previous role in product at that company.
Yeah. So I guess prior to what I'm doing now, I was in product management for 10 years, effectively, in different, like all sorts of different size companies, from like ones on the stock market that were absolutely huge with like
Wow.
7,000 people to small teams of 20 or even less, like even 10.
And that's not even a small team, right? Some people would say that's a big team.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, for a startup. So yeah, no, I've kind of seen it from both sides, and then of course, like I've also done startups and stuff previously before I was in product management. So you kind of see both sides of it, like the advantages and disadvantages of varying size teams and resources, I guess, as well, and how they function. But yeah, with what I'm doing now, I've tried to take everything I've learned from being a product manager and actually being able to apply it now. So it's pretty exciting to be able to actually implement rather than just write Jira tickets all day, or kind of look at designs. So it's been super exciting to do that.
Cool. You say write Jira tickets all day. I mean, I get it, right? I've been there too, but like, talk about some of like what are the things that you did in the PM role? Like maybe just because have 10 years of experience, maybe just hone in on like one position where you interacted with, several different stakeholders, and like what was your role in that? And just for those that don't know about PMing and what it looks like and like the importance of it, and like just kind of bring us a little bit through that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an interesting story from when I was at one of the larger companies that I worked at. So I was trying to get them to launch an app on the iOS App Store, and like to do that in a startup, you probably just kind of you just do it really effectively. Like you make a plan and do it, but when you're a product manager in a larger organization like that, a lot of it is building the case, doing the research of why we should do this thing, getting the designs done, doing feasibility on it and how we're actually going to do this. And it's a lot of it's just communication about talking to loads of different functions within the business. So whether that is kind of design, customer research, business, legal, we're involved a lot. So yeah, it's a lot of it's some people call it like a mini CEO. I don't know if that's always accurate, because you don't really have the decision making function a lot of the time. Like you're kind of getting stuff together and then trying to get consensus with different groups to do stuff. But then again, at a startup, you probably are making a lot more decisions. So again, it depends on the size of the company. But yeah I think it's largely kind of making the plan, getting the argument together, and getting a clear kind of strategy of how this thing's going to be built and implemented and then measured. So how do we know if this is going to be successful? What are we going to be measuring it against? All that kind of stuff. So yeah, tons of different elements to it. It is a super exciting kind of job to do.
Yeah, I think one of the things I loved about being a PM in that way is you're all over the place and interacting with so many different people, right? Like in the morning, I had design meetings, and then after that, I had development meetings, and then I had leadership meetings, and just coordinating between all those departments, and then checking in with my technical support and my CSM teams and seeing what they're hearing, and just trying to leverage them to get feedback about, well, how can we improve this product? And it creates this cycle, which sometimes feels really daunting, where your backlog just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can like never do it well enough, right? But I think I want to take it back a bit and just say, like, when an idea comes up, maybe each of us can go through how we go from idea to finished product, or how we think about taking an idea to finished product in terms of, our process. And I'll start with this for my last team. If we had an idea, the first thing that we, usually the idea came from our customers, hopefully, and or we were talking to our customers about it. And so that's where the idea came from. Or it was a competitor that had a previous service and they've already kind of tested the market in that way, right? And so from idea, and I'm not saying this is the right way, this is just the way we did it, but from idea, we went to wireframes, right? And we just started to sketch out that wireframe. And usually with wireframes, we also did comp research of like, how are other people doing these designs and attacking this idea, right? And then once we had wireframes, we turned into hi-fi protos so we could start to feel around of, does this feature feel good from a UI UX standpoint, right? And at that point, we would then put it in front of customers and say, hey, we have this idea. Here's a super rough proto. How does this feel? How does this look? Does it solve your problems, right? And, it depends on the company, how many customers you can get in front of. We always try to get it like a minimum of 5, 10 to 20 would be more ideal. Maybe even more than that if we could, but we just didn't have that volume. And if the feedback was trending well at that point, then we would, pass it back to leadership, get all their feedback, and then start a final like hi-fi design process where we put into designs, then we do final protos, and then we pass those protos over to our sales team to start actually pre-selling it. Well, we then pass it over to our dev team. Our dev team did a technical scope on it. We broke it down into Jira segments. And then we started to, all the issues had clear documentation on it and assigned to Figma, design links. And then from there, they started building it, the developers. I also forgot in that process, PRDs, just the simple, writing documentation before even wireframes come up. It's probably just our first step is we have this idea. All right, let's write it out. What is this idea? Let's get leadership approval of like, this is the documentation of what is this idea going to do? How could this idea be successful when we launch it? Like, what are those success metrics? And get everyone on board before design gets involved, before development gets involved, just to really de-risk as much as possible. Because I think you and I, as bubblers, we're used to we have an idea, we'll just go build it in 30 minutes, right? But once you get to that bigger org, it doesn't work that way. You can't do that for the most part. And there's so much going into building these things, investment from the company, time, all that kind of stuff that you really need to not only plan it, but de-risk it as much as possible to ensure that when you do launch it, it is a success.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably worth mentioning that a lot of the big companies they do have exactly that process that you described, but it means they move very, very slow.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time they'll be trying to figure out ways constantly that they can do all that stuff quicker, because there's that is the kind of the downside of doing product management in larger companies, is that yes, you have a lot of variety, but the pace can be glacial.
Especially in a traditional developer environment.
Oh, totally. Before you've even got to build the thing, you've had umpteen meetings about it, and it may not, and it turns out you build it and it's not actually the right thing anyway, and that whole cycle takes such a long time. So it's, I think product management, I feel like, is changing a lot, and it is going to be probably unrecognizable as a function in 5 years' time. I think there were some interesting developments at Airbnb recently where they rearranged their product teams to be more product marketing teams. Yeah. And I think that will become kind of more prevalent, as things like AI and streamlined processes and no code, to be honest, kind of make their way into product management. I think the role is changing a lot. It's a role that's a bit different at every company anyway.
Right. I think you always need that communicator, though. That middleman between all the departments, just doing all this communication. I think that will always be consistent, but maybe that's more of a, maybe a 30%, a developer who's 30% that, and then 70% developing, or a designer that's doing, or I don't know, maybe something that's, but I think you always need that central man or woman spreading all that communication, because there's just so many different stakeholders that need to be communicated with and input, you need to get their input and share the input, etc.
Yeah. And, I think where possible, even in large organizations, you want to reduce the number of stakeholders to the absolute minimum. Like in Amazon, like the 2 pizza team, like it's just like if you can get the functions together on a small team, you move infinitely quicker. So
Yeah.
if you've got the designers and the developers and the product manager and maybe a scrum master sat in a small team and they're
Yeah.
working on one specific like feature or area of the product, you can move so much quicker. So yeah, I think the whole role will continue to exist. It's just going to change. I don't think product managers are going to be sitting there writing acceptance criteria and all this kind of stuff much longer. I already, in my last job, had switched to doing a lot of that with ChatGPT, but it
Yeah.
does it extremely well. So I think
Yeah.
it's trying to merge all these different things together and just find ways of doing stuff that customers find useful quicker. Like at the end of the day, that's what matters. So
Yeah, I think the important part there is like you don't want to do this process just to do the process, right? Like the process
yeah,
has to be helpful, and if it's not, then you need to make it helpful for you and your customers, because they just want their problem solved, right? They don't care how you solve their problems; they just want them problem solved. But you need to figure out how you're going to do that in a good way. And so, like you said, it's different for every team. In our no code team, we had very quick sprints. Like typically, I don't know, our we started off as a 2 week cycle on our sprints. Eventually got down to a 1 week. Can you still see me? I think I'm
yeah,
frozen. Okay.
yeah, I see you.
Eventually got down to a 1 week. And I mean, we were cruising through there. But I think, one of the downsides of moving at that speed was fatigue, in the sense of like, it's so much to be pushing all the time, right? And I think one of the things that we could have done better from a no code team is understanding, like, once you push something, that doesn't mean you move on to the next thing. I think that means there's some kind of wind down period that comes with launching that new feature, gauging the metrics of that new feature, seeing what's working of that new feature, and then making those modifications post launch to really get that feature there. I think normally when we push stuff, we're just working as hard as we can to get it to work and to get it out the door, right? But then it usually requires some of that, a week afterwards of, all right, now this works. Now we could just optimize it a little bit. Now we can document it. Now we can clean it up. Now we can monitor it. And I don't think, at least I didn't do a good enough job planning those wind down cycles. And I think it's probably because, it's hard to pitch those additional time spent on that feature to leadership of, hey, yes, we just launched this and we all want to move on to the next thing, but this is kind of part of that launch now, is winding down this launch, getting this feedback, seeing if the comments coming in are going to go in an immediate bucket or onto the next V2 bucket, and kind of talking about that as well.
100%. And having those metrics in place up front about what you're going to measure to decide whether this thing's successful or not is so important.
Yeah.
Because equally, you might need to make tweaks to the feature, or the feature might just not work, and then in that
Right.
case you need to remove it. And
Yeah.
I'm quite ruthless about removing stuff that doesn't work, because the more, that's where you really get into having nightmare tech debt situations. You got all these features, half of them no one uses, and you've got to maintain it. So that whole post feature launch thing, either you're going to iterate it to a place where it's working, or you remove it like pretty quickly. And it is something you do see on big like you can see it on Twitter right now. Like it's changing a lot. Stuff
Yeah.
doesn't work, but that's kind of more what like startups are like, I guess. Like you are quickly trying to get to this place of product market fit, whether it's through iteration or cutting back things. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
super interesting.
I think removing features that you launch is a really interesting thing. Like, right, like one part is well, you just spent all this time. Why do you want to remove it? It's there. But then the second part of it is, well, if it's still there, you need to service it, you need to maintain it, you need to, support it, which is so much bandwidth. And if it's just not being leveraged to the point that's successful for you, why spend it there? But like, when do you actually make that decision? Like, how long, do you wait to say, all right, we got to cut the wire here and delete this feature and move on? Like, I think it's different for every team. It's different for every feature. I don't think it's after day 2. I think you got to let it breathe a little bit more than that, right? But do you have any kind of like sweet spot of like, hey, it's been a month, no one's used this based on our metrics. I think it's time to cut bait.
Yeah, I think it's gonna vary depending on team, type of user. I think a lot of it. I think in general, most people leave it too long or never remove it.
Yeah,
So you've got to.
mostly.
I think some sense of urgency in validating whether this thing is working or not is quite important. Because if it isn't, if no one's using it a month after you've launched it, it's probably not working. So
Right.
then, why is that? Is it that our product marketing hasn't been sufficient? We're not sending people to it.
Yeah.
Is it not actually a valuable feature? That's where having good product metrics, something like mixed panel, full story, proper augmentation over being able to measure what people are using is so important. And a lot of teams don't have that, or it's not very comprehensive. Like that's so important,
Yeah.
and that comes at the beginning of the feature by saying, okay, how do we know if it's going to work? Okay, I'm going to measure how many people do this and this, and if no one's doing it, then maybe this wasn't worth doing. we should
Right.
we should
And,
cut it.
setting up those metrics, it should be part of your build of, hey, here's the new feature. And then here are the metrics that we need to track for this new feature. That's just built into the build for that. So that way, when you launch that, you're ready to track and see if it's a success or not. And I think determining, pre-launch, how long are you going to give this thing, probably from an org standpoint of, hey, we're going to wait a month. If we can get to these metrics, it'll be a success. If not, let's reevaluate, maybe talk to some customers, see what we did wrong so we don't repeat these same mistakes, kind of thing.
100%. And I think it's something that is I'm always surprised by, but more like loads of product teams either don't ever use the product themselves, like so they don't know how it works, or and they never talk to customers. And like those are the two things I think everyone should be doing. You have to use your own product. Like uh, you, just doing following a testing suite, or it doesn't really. It's just kind of going through the motions, and but I think you really have to be a user of it yourself to appreciate whether stuff's
Yeah,
working.
it's hard. I understand it's hard, especially in a no code team, to always use the latest features that are being shipped, but you need to do it, right? You're shipping these features to solve problems. And if you're not using it, and if you're not familiar with it, and you're not seeing that it's solving problems, or seeing how it's just making interference or anything like that, then why even build it? So if you
Mm,
can't keep up with using everything that you are building, how can you expect your customer to? You know?
exactly. Yeah. And if you can't use it for some reason, is it what the kind of product you're using? Like you should be sitting there watching screen recordings every day. Like I watch screen recordings constantly of what customers are doing, and you will find out what isn't working and what isn't, and where
Yeah.
people are confused. Uh, it does take time, but you kind of got to do it, especially in the earlier days. Like if you're trying to work out if something's working, like you will very quickly pick up. Where people are getting confused. And again, yeah, just talking to customers. Like it sounds basic, but it doesn't happen a lot of the time.
It doesn't happen. I think it's intimidating. It's scary for some people, right? Just to get on the phone with a customer. And it's just a hassle to like arrange all that, but it's just you're literally building for them, you know?
Totally,
And
yeah.
and they need to be on board about it. Like when I before I launch it, and I'm not saying I'm the poster child here, but before I launch anything, I go to my Twitter audience. I say, "Do you want me to launch this? How should I launch this? Does this curriculum look good?" Like all this kind of stuff, because I'm building for that audience, right? So I want to make sure that this is what they want, because it's literally for them. It's as much as I love doing it, it's for them, and I need them to support it in order for me to continue to do it, right? Very similar thing with any kind of product you're building. And so, like personally, the products that I have honestly seen be the most successful are the products where they start off with no technology. They're just like a spreadsheet and like calling people, and like they're just solving problems manually for their customer,
Mm,
right? And some kind of manual hack together Zapier kind of thing. And they're it's repeating, right? And so they know that problem so well. And then as soon as they apply tech to that, then they can remove themselves, but it's already been proven, right? Like that was totally not me initially. Like I was raising money for the first time for my first startup as a non-technical founder, and I was at this angel investment pitch, And the other person I was pitching against was totally different. So I had at that point built a ton of technology, right? But I had a ton of free users and their usage was very low and I had no revenue. And then the guy I was pitching with or against or whatever had no technology. It was all spreadsheets, right? But he had incredible revenue and incredible retention on his service that people, it was a landing page, which is essentially just backed up to a spreadsheet of him calling everyone, right? And they thought matches were happening for the technology, right? We both end up going on to raise money, fortunately. But his company is still alive today, doing well, and mine isn't, right? And I think it's just because he was able to solve that customer problem before any kind of the fancy stuff got involved, just the root problems of solving it really well. And me, I was throwing tech at everything I possibly could to try and solve problems, but none of it really working. You know what I mean? And I think because no code, you can move so fast. And I think as solo builders, sometimes we get overwhelmed with, I can't do all this whole product thing. I'll just build it. And then I end up with a product that has 30 features. No one knows anything about any of it. And they're all kind of like half there. And then it just doesn't work because you've been so, you know what I mean? So I think even as a solo builder, you need to take a step back and say, okay, before I build this next feature, is it going to solve problems? Are customers asking for it? And is it going to really take my product to the next level? Because there's an opportunity cost there. If you're not spending your time on that, what else can you be spending on that could be driving the business forward, And at the end of the day, revenue is king. And if that's not going to generate more revenue, then maybe you should look at something that will.
Totally, yeah. And I mean, there's a couple of ways you can do it. I mean, there's a really fun exercise that I do quite often. That's the thing they do at Amazon, where they write the actual kind of press release for the product before they start building it, or even
that's fun.
there's it's the first thing, like right at the beginning, you write the press release. There's some amazing templates online of like press releases of Amazon stuff before they built it. But it's a really good exercise because it gets you to think, actually, how is this helping my customer? How's it helping them? How are we going to sell this thing? And it forces you to address some of those questions up front. I mean, with my
is it like really like big enough to make a press release out of?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've got to condense it down into a page. Basically, it's one
Yeah.
page. What are the headlines about this thing that's delivering value for people? Like, why is
I love that?
Who cares what technology it's built with, or what customers don't care. Like, how is it delivering value to them? Because I think, it's very easy to get wrapped up in, oh my god, like there's OpenAI's come out. How can I make something with this? Well, you kind of got to go back to the beginning and think, actually, how can I do something that's like high value for customers that are going to pay me money for? So it's a really good exercise. I did something kind of similar with my first startup, like before Bubble, no code or anything. I literally, to get the first customers, I made a PowerPoint deck with some designs on and said, this is the product. And then, I eventually got a few pre-orders from people. And then I was like, oh my God, now I've actually got to go and build this thing or find someone to build it. But like now you don't have to, like you can do it yourself. And that's the big change, I think. But it's still a useful exercise.
Yeah, 100%. I think one thing that I also want to talk about is like, when I went to go build my first company, I sent out a survey to all my network, and I was like, "Hey, is this a good idea?" Right? Which I think is still a good step. But when I looked at all the feedback, I looked at the feedback that I wanted to hear, right? And I didn't ask the hard questions then of, okay, this person didn't really say that they loved it. Why not? Really dig into that. I was looking for something to validate my own things. And so I just skimmed for the best stuff. And I was like, oh, if they love it, oh, it's going to be great. Right. But I think I could have solved a lot of my problems at that stage right there before I built anything, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, time and everything I sent out 300 surveys. I got like 150 responses. That's a good amount of responses. And maybe 20% of those were like, I should have spent all my entire time on that 20%. Figuring out why it was and solving those things, those problems, those concerns, all those things right then and there before actually getting further. And I did it, right, because I was a first-time non-tech founder, just trying to get there. I wanted to do it. I was so excited. I was looking for ways to validate what I was gonna do. And, and so, like, going forward, what I would recommend is you still send out the surveys, but you have maybe several different people also review and take in the feedback. And so it's not just you and your own perceived, how should I incorporate this? You have neutral opinions and rating that and providing insight. And then for the folks that do give you grief, I think that those are the best kind, right? Like, that's where you need to have those hard decisions and discussions. Like, if you do it now, you're going to save yourself worlds of pain and money, because maybe though at the end of the day, maybe they're just right, right? And you just need to face it now rather than 3 years later. So yeah, looking back on that original journey, I was just like, man, I really screwed up there.
I think it's a great idea to do surveys, to get that kind of info back. I think one thing to be cautious of when you do those kind of surveys, and you say, I mean, like, one question you can ask is like, how much would you pay for this? And a lot of the time, people will want to be nice to you, and they're your friends, and they're like, oh, I would pay for this. I'd pay $20
Oh
for it
my
or
God.
whatever.
Yeah.
Well, okay, here's the order form, put your card in, and then
Yeah.
you'll know. Because a
Yeah.
lot of people just want to be nice when you're
Yeah.
doing those surveys, and they'll say, yeah, I'd pay for it. And I actually wouldn't.
Yeah.
So, like, the real way of, I think you do it, and a lot of other people do it with, when you're making stuff, is to do pre-orders.
Yeah.
Get those card details, and that really will tell you whether there's demand or not. Rather than just kind of asking, because a lot of us kind of don't want to offend anyone, and you just say yes. But it's actually, can you get the pre-orders is a really, really good test. I mean, if you can get pre-orders for an app idea, like, that is the strongest signal that you get on and do it now. It's like, not that it's hard to get, so if you've got that as a signal, it's really, really valuable.
Yeah, I mean, you gave me a perfect segue in there to discuss my next course, which is building product, a professional product, and operations. And it's with the lens of, like, working on a no code team, right? So I spent the last 2 years working professionally as a no code developer, and I've worked on several different teams, several different product teams, and each ran themselves each a bit differently. The first product team I was just a member of. The second product team, I actually went and built that product team. Um, and during that process, I learned, the agile method. I learned Jira. I learned Confluence. I learned, how to kind of work through this step by step. And that's one of the things that no coders need to graduate to, as, okay, I'm a solo builder, and now I'm going to go work professionally for a company for the first time. And this is normally sometimes new language, new systems, new way to do all of this. And my course here is an attempt to just get them up to speed with all these systems and everything. So right away, they're hireable for any kind of professional team. Or if their company that they're working on now, because they started learning Bubble for their own entrepreneurial journey, that it gets funded and they're ready to build a team, then they know how to put these processes in place to go off and to build that team, right? So it's my way of just saying, hey, I am offering professional Bubble courses, as a professional no coder, and here are the systems, the operations, everything that we can expect for working in a professional environment. And I've assembled, so much curriculum that into this, of just, starting with the very importance of, like, what is the team, what are all the positions, but then getting into the introductions of agile, going through user stories and custom interviews, kind of a bit of what we talked about today, why they're important, when we should do it, when we should not do it, when it makes sense, right? And so I have this rule from filmmaking days where it's like, you want to learn all the rules so you can know when to break the rules, right? And so, like, my goal with this course is to teach you the basic structure, the basic hierarchy of how all these agile systems work and all this kind of stuff. So then that way, when you go to join a team or whatever, you can just fit right in with that team. And or when you build your own team, you can choose what works best for you, and also understand, there is a typical traditional structure to building product, and here are all the kind of reasons why. And if you can leverage this for building your own product in the future, it could also help you in that way too. So, yeah, I'm excited about this course because, with No Code Alliance, one of the big things for me is, helping people get to that professional place, right? Like as no code evolves and we all begin to take on professional careers, I'm a professional no code dev, that's my career, right? There comes these next systems of like, okay, well, I'm going to go join a team. What is that salary? How much do I get paid there? How do I operate within this team? What is this team structure? What is the daily ritual with stand-ups, and how do I work through my sprints and my issues, and all these kind of soft skills that go into also being a professional no coder is kind of what I'm hoping to put into this course here. And so, yeah, I'm pretty stoked about it. I don't think there's much about this kind of stuff in the no code landscape yet, as well as, which is another reason why I wanted to, get out there and teach these soft skills. And then I'll also relate it back to Bubble, where I'll teach the soft skills of like, in systems like Jira and Confluence, but you could take those skills and put them in any systems you want, but then relate it back to, okay, now you have a production application in Bubble. How do we go about, QAing this? How do we go about reporting bugs and prioritizing those bugs? How do we go about automated reporting and just like the upkeep of a production app? Because so many of us have experienced building MVPs, but so few of us have experience running production apps, managing that production app, right? And that's also what I want this course to embody is, all right, I'm going to teach you how to be a professional, and then I'm going to teach you how to work with production apps. So once you are joining that professional org, you all also have that experience of production apps, because it's just hard to find folks with that kind of experience right now, because it's such a new thing.
Absolutely. And, I think it's great to have content like this, because it's great for the whole ecosystem. There's not many apps like I think that have got to that point of real scale on Bubble. It's totally possible. Like I'm doing it, you've done it, like loads of it's a really great way to build a tech company, but there aren't a lot of resources around about how, what the best practice is yet. So it's great to see this stuff starting to appear, because it's crucial for the whole ecosystem to mature. We want to attract more developers into it. We want more people to build with it. And having resources like this makes it possible. So I think it sounds great. And I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot from it for myself. I'll have to check it out, but it sounds awesome.
I appreciate that. Yeah. It's when I've been hiring Bubble devs for a while, right? And so when I'm interviewing around and talking to a lot of Bubble devs, this is just another area that I saw of like, how can I onboard and train my devs to get them up to speed as soon as possible, right? And so by making these courses, it does so much for me already of like, when I go to hire a Bubble dev and I'm evaluating them and I'm like, okay, well, your workflow skills are good, but your database skills are lacking and you've never worked with a team before. So onboarding you means you're going to take my database course and my professional product course, and asynchronously you're going to get up to speed, and it doesn't cost the company any manpower or resources really behind the course cost to get them there, right? And like that's another way that I'm thinking about this is how can we give the employer the tools that they need to know that the people that they're hiring are at that level that they need to be at that professional level, because no code's so new. There's no way to gauge this stuff. Like there's very little certifications. That's something we're trying to do. Bring certifications. Because before you had degrees and all that kind of stuff. Work experience is tough. If you've been building a Bubble for your own application for the last 3 years, like you're whiz in Bubble. But if you go to apply elsewhere, you're just going to have one application to show them and say, hey, trust me, this is cool. I'm good, right? And so employers don't know that. And so figuring out how we can give employers resources to say, okay, they have all these certifications, or if they've taken these courses, they have this basic criteria of understanding at these levels. I feel good about that. Then I think it can make it easier for employers to hire no-code devs, which then makes it so more no-code devs are working professionally and having success professionally, which then helps us all, get up there, build more teams, all that kind of stuff, right? But if, they hire no-code devs, they don't know how to work professionally, they weren't great, then that is a bad rep for the rest of us. And then maybe that CEO, instead of building a no-code team, they build a traditional team, and there's a lost opportunity. So it's hard because we're so early on into this world of enterprise no-code, but it is so exciting in the same sense, like seeing what my no-code team from my last company was able to ship in 12 months. It is just when I talk to a traditional team and they're like, what, you did all that? It's like, yes, like that's the speed that we can move. Like we built an MVP in 3 months, and a week later we were in revenue, and we've been generating revenue ever since, right? Like that's the speed that you can move if you're able to leverage a no-code team successfully. But there's just some learnings and things that you got to get up to speed with that. And hopefully this course and my other courses kind of tie it all together with an a la carte way of what you need to do to get there. So that's my goal, at least.
Absolutely. And I think there is that there is that jump between building an MVP through to building an application for like production and scale, and there are different skill sets. So you need to be able to, it's thinking in a certain way. And Bubble is really fun when you get started with it, to be able to build an app quickly as an MVP. But it is a different mindset to build something that you're thinking, this is going to be production, it's going to be millions of workflows. How do you manage that? How do you monitor that? And the structure of a team, how are you working with other people? That is all completely different. So I think it's really important that companies can hire people and know that they're going to do quality work. Basically, if I was having other people working on my application, it's really, really important that they're doing stuff to a high standard, doing stuff in a certain way, like whether it's how you're managing workflows or putting things into folders or using backend workflows or whatever it is, that it's done in a way that I can come into it or another developer can come into it and pick that up. And I think that's the jump, from getting started with Bubble. We've all built kind of those scrappy first versions of an app, but you do need to progress onto that thinking of saying, oh, if I've got to come back to this workflow in a year, bear that in mind. Or someone else has got to be able to pick it up. So but the benefits are absolutely astounding of building with no code. I think, as you've said, I've worked in countless startups with dev teams, at great expense, and what you can achieve in no code. I still don't think it's fully realized in what's possible. I mean, to build my app UserLoop, it would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars of developers' time to build it, without question. So you can have high quality production software that generates real money, is extremely high quality, beautifully designed, fast. I think there's a lot of kind of misconceptions about it, but the technology has come on so much over the last kind of couple of years. I do still feel like we're right at the beginning of it, though, especially with AI and everything, and it's going to be the way to build software, particularly in the early stages. I don't think any SaaS business should start without building at least the first version in no code, in Bubble specifically. There is no reason not to.
It's just so quick. It's just so quick to validate that idea, right? And we can also get into UserLoop here too, because I think this is where you have really excelled. Is you built your first version in Bubble, and your application has what's a good way to say it? High volume, right? You're doing surveys, right? So there's a lot of surveys being done. So high CRUD, right? Which is not necessarily the best suit for Bubble, but you were able to get to market quickly, validate it. It's a viable option. And then slowly you've been pushing off those resources that could be better suited to other technologies as you've reached scale, as you've reached success, right? And it's just been one at a time. You've been pushing these things off, but you're still leveraging Bubble for front end and all of its benefits as much as possible. So you still get a lot of that speed, and you still get all the power. So I think you've done a perfect job of, you got to market fast, you've tested its viability, it worked. Now I've reached scale. Now, when it makes sense, I'm just slowly offboarding things to AWS and other ways to get more scale there, because now that's a problem, or could be a problem because of the CRUD that you needed at that scale. But yet you never had to abandon Bubble. You never had to do any of that stuff. You never had to rebuild. It's just part of the process of, all right, you validated, you reach scale. Now this makes sense to push this here to get a small increase in performance here, and you just keep tweaking in that way.
Absolutely. I'd never want to sacrifice building with Bubble. It's just the advantages are so immense. You find a way to deal with certain things as you scale, like using an external database for one particular thing, which is the very high volume, order and survey data. That works really, really well. But I think as Bubble matures as a company as well, it's going to get better at handling larger scale. My preference would be to do everything on Bubble where possible. And it's just where I need to do specific things that we've kind of used AWS for caching APIs or whatever it is. But yeah, the core of the product is and always will be Bubble. I think the ability to move fast and work within that the builder and the workflow kind of concept is so valuable. I can't imagine switching.
It's so fast. And one of the cool things that I like is, like, listen, there are downsides about Bubble, but one of the things that I really love is it gets better every single day, right? The tech that you're building today, you can go to sleep and tomorrow they will have made improvements to make that tech run faster, right? And so you're building on something that is incredibly fast to solve your customer problems, that is continuously evolving and getting better. It's hard to beat it with an all-in solution. So, my last company, we try to go to Zano for our backend, for our primary backend, which is a fantastic backend provider. I love it. And if it's a good use case for you, go for it. But for us, we needed to get to market as soon as possible. We needed to see if our customers, were going to succeed with the solutions we were putting out there as soon as possible. And when we switched to Zano, the speed of development just significantly decreased. And we weren't at a point where we were ready for that. We didn't need the scale of that yet, right? So we were like, all right, this is premature. We don't need to get here yet, right? We don't even know if this is working. We don't need to build for 2 years from now. We need to build for today, for tomorrow, solve problems now. And then once we see if a specific operation is running too long or whatever, it's starting to be a pain, then we'll solve it. We'll figure out how to solve it then, which is totally doable in any kind of way with Bubble, because you can expand upon it that way. So yeah, we went back to Bubble, and then we got back to shipping like lightning speeds, and we've been there since. And so that's always the way I take it, is your exact approach. Build on Bubble, test its viability. As soon as you start to see something slow down one way or another, look for a specific tech that would help you solve that, and then integrate just that one process, that one workflow, that one operation, whatever it need be, and keep everything else there. And you can just slowly start doing that. What is some of the tech that you've used to, fix some of the scaling stuff that you've seen?
Yeah, so I think probably the two biggest kind of impacts to reducing, I guess, workflow utilization, or like just amount of stuff my app is doing, is firstly so it has an API which is used to serve surveys, basically, and that has hit a lot. So there's millions of requests asking for surveys all the time.
That's awesome.
So one thing to put in the middle there, to make that response instant, because Bubbles can be a bit slow with responding to API requests. It was way too slow for my use case, because if you're in the checkout, survey needs to appear immediately, 2 seconds or whatever is too long. So for that bit, we've put in the AWS API gateway with caching, and basically every hour it will keep a fresh cache, or you can invalidate the cache. But that means you get an instant response, and it's not hitting Bubble constantly.
Yeah.
So it's only hitting Bubble once an hour instead of 10,000 or whatever. So that made a massive difference. Fairly easy to implement. I wrote about that on my newsletter a while back.
That's awesome.
The other one was, there is one particular type of data in my app that is a lot, which is the responses to the survey. So it's like the biggest table. And it got to a point where, for my biggest customers, to run counts on that was really expensive. It's just slow as well. It's like waiting 20, 30 seconds for counts. It wasn't ideal. So for that, we switched to a great new database called Tinybird. I wrote about that as well. So you send data into Tinybird with a post request through the API connector, and you query back with another API, but it's instant counts over millions of records.
So you're still storing in your Bubble database?
Yeah. So it's mostly used for counts. So there is a replication there at the moment.
So
it's
you're
my
taking the data in your bubble database, you're posting it to Tinybird, and you're just retrieving the count that they're doing there that is faster than what Bubble's able to get you
Yeah,
back.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So it's lightning fast counts, which was that specific problem. But it's like we were saying, I didn't want to give up all the other benefits of doing stuff in Bubble. So
Yeah.
my preference would be that Bubble speeds up counts. And I did try. I know they have a couple of operators, like
The cached
clo-
counts and all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't accurate for me. But yeah, it's just an illustration, I guess, of if
Sure.
you do get to that point where you have a problem, you can
And
solve it.
and can you give us like a rough figure of the volume that you were seeing that with?
Oh, it's like millions of records. Yeah, so it was
Okay.
like a lot. It was like a lot.
Yeah.
I think that my issue was there was filters applied to it, so it's
Yeah.
question X between this date and time, and
Ah,
you get, it's not just a simple count. There are some kind of joiny type things that make it a little bit more resource intensive. But yeah, again, I need to probably brush up a little bit on my Bubble database skills. I've reread their updated documentation recently and about it being in Postgres, and so I think there probably is some better ways to do it in Bubble.
yeah. But I think your use case for, getting counts on millions of figures with advanced filtering as quick as possible, it's still a struggle. Like Bubbles DB still isn't quite there yet. So I think what you're doing with Tinybird is awesome. I think if you're able to get those responses, it's crazy that you can just post it and then just get that count back so quickly. So that's awesome. I think that's probably still best case.
Yeah, yeah, and we're constantly like evaluating as well. So I will sometimes put in a solution and then remove it later on. I think my thinking is I want as few dependencies as
Sure.
possible. Um, so yeah, I'm stripping stuff out fairly regularly and swapping it out. Because to manage an application at scale, you want it to be as simple as possible, basically, to
Yeah.
make it, for just being manageability and just operationally.
Honestly, that's such a great point. Like you managing an application at scale, you want it as simple as possible. And you're 100% right, right? Like that's why you need to build for efficiency in the beginning, right? Like if you have a payment workflow where you're signing a user up for a subscription, don't build that 5 different places. You build it once in a backend workflow, you trigger it there, and then you service that, you maintain that, you update it in one place, not 5 different places, right? So like making those decisions early on will help keep your app simple when it gets big, because to your point, it's like when apps get big, it gets really complex. And if you have so many things and dependencies, you're just like crippling yourself, and you still need to be able to move quick, right? And so you need to build a simple infrastructure to get you there. And I know it's easier said than done. It's hard. You're building advanced technology, right?
Mm.
So I understand that, but keep it as simple as possible, as much as possible, because we're not just building for MVP. We're building for scale. We're building to run a successful business for years. And that means you got to be able to service it in an easy way. Otherwise, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot from the beginning.
Absolutely, and don't be afraid of refactoring. I've refactored my app, several times since it started, with big data migrations and stuff like along the way. Coincidentally, refactoring in Bubble is like insanely easy compared to any other kind of refactor you can
Yeah,
imagine. It's like redoing your workflows or whatever.
yeah,
But yeah, generally, I totally agree. Everything I try and do is on back-end workflows. They're all structured into folders, so if it's to do with subscriptions or XYZ.
yeah,
I kind of think of backend workflows as being like microservices. So
yeah,
like I have a microservice that does this thing, and then I will call it from the Bubble front end. But yeah, I try not to have any logic in the front end really, like
yeah,
that's like business dependent. I try and do it in the back end as much as possible.
yeah. One of the problems that we experienced in my last company was we had really old users that were using old devices, right? And those devices only had like literally 2 gigs of RAM, right? And on page load, we were doing checks for do whens and page load conditions, and we had a bunch of reusables that were triggering conditions on page load, all that kind of stuff. and our page loads would just eat up that entire device's RAM. And for those users, because we were asking so much on the client side, those users just couldn't really even use our app because it was just too much, right? Bubble just demanded too much from too many client-side workflows. And so it was a slow process of just removing as much as possible client-side, removing as much as possible any kind of checks that need to happen, and just kind of storing default states to remove those checks, to kind of get it to a point of you load a page. It's not really asking for much else. You're doing a couple basic searches, then you're recycling those searches elsewhere, and just get it to that point, because I'm on a supercomputer. So when I'm developing, it looks fast, but not everyone else has 64 gigs of RAM, So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, you can't build for you. You need to build for the person that has 2 gigs of RAM on their tablet, but needs to use your thing, because that's your customer. And if you can't solve their problems, then again, you're not solving their problems.
Definitely, and it comes back to the whole measurement thing. If you weren't measuring or talking to customers, you might not even know that was a problem.
Right.
You wouldn't even see those people because they can't use it. So it shows you.
Unfortunately, like us, you're getting those complaints too late in the game, where it's like customer service comes in and they're like, "Hey, this person says they can't use your thing because it's too slow," and you're like, "Oh no, I can't be too slow,"
Mm,
And then it's just like, okay, now we got to go backtrack, and get there. But it's like, if you did your research early on and you saw your customer, your personas, what were the devices, what were they working with? Do they understand scroll bars or not scroll bars? Like things like that are literally a thing, and what you should bake into your product as you're building it, because that's your customer and you need to know it. And if you're not taking the time early on with your product strategy and your operations and your systems, then then you're going to get into this point where you're just constantly trying to solve the problems before actually just solving it before it's ever even a problem, and it just works,
definitely.
Cool.
Makes sense.
Cool. Where can people find more about you as we wrap up here? If you want to drop some stuff into your comments, your application, maybe your newsletter, you run an awesome newsletter for Bubble Builders. Anything, if you want to share, feel free to put in the comments. But yeah.
Yeah. I guess probably the best place to find me is on Twitter at James Davenport, or nocodesas.io is my newsletter. And yeah, that's kind of like I write about the things I learn building like a production scale application on Bubble. So it's kind of a ride along type thing. But yeah, no, it's been great to chat though.
Yeah, and you do a fantastic job with that newsletter. I'm still learning a bunch from that newsletter, so thank you for doing that. I think you're one of the examples in the community where you're a bit more quiet, but you're finding a lot of success in your own way, and I love to bring attention to that whenever possible. So he's definitely a great follow for all of you that are meeting him for the first time. A strong product background, but now an indie builder, building his own SaaS with great success. He won't toot his own horn, but it's doing really well. I mean, he has clients that have millions of records within his own SaaS. It's doing well and making money. I'm excited for the day when you go to sell it and to see what that acquisition cost is going to be, because I think it's going to be pretty good for the whole no-code community. But James, thank you for joining me today. It's always a pleasure talking to you. You're an absolute gentleman. So thank you for taking the time. And for our audience, I hope this was valuable to see how you can leverage product for your upcoming builds. Check out my course at nocodealliance.com. Sorry, nocodealliance.org/professional-product. It's in the comments. And that will get you everything that you need to know to get up to speed to work in a professional no-code environment, to build your own professional no-code teams. And of course, just managing a production application, things that we talked about today, what you can do to de-risk some of the things, so you're taking 2 steps forward and not 1 step forward, 2 steps back, because it's a thing that can easily be done by moving at the speeds that we can move with no code. And so the goal is to help prevent that and to get you into a professional place so you can make this your career. And it is an awesome career at that. So thanks for everyone for tuning in today, and we'll catch you whenever we catch you next time. See ya.